So, are we back from lunch? I hope nobody's falling asleep now. I mean, it was nice outside, but now let's focus again. I am really honored to say hello today to Charmin Love from England. She's working at Volans, which is a venture, which is a part think tank, consultancy and broker between public and private business, situated in London and Singapore. Charmin holds a degree in arts history and an MBA degree from Harvard Business School, and she works particularly with public and private customers to scale up social innovation strategies, and just a few words on that. I think that, we've heard a lot, and everybody of you, if you read the newspaper, you might get the impression that big business has some kind of lost the touch towards society, touch to the environment, and I think that right now, as we're living in a century of changes and in years of change, that big business is starting to acknowledge again what real value creation is, and the value that if you create really sustainable value, if you focus on social value creation. And Charmin does exactly that. She's, as I said, working with public and private sector to develop social innovation strategies, and today she's going to tell us about how social innovation generation can create sustainable value. Please welcome Charmin.
Okay, usually I wouldn't use a microphone, to be honest, but I've been told I should. If for some reason I start jumping and moving around, which I might, can someone just remind me that I need to have a microphone somewhere near me? Otherwise, I totally won't remember. First off, thank you, Marcus, and thank you to everyone here at the school that's been put on this conference. I understand this is the first time we've had a conference of this kind on social entrepreneurship and social innovation. So it's a really great that all of you have taken time out of your weekends, especially beautiful weekends when it's really sunny and beautiful, to come and learn about what's happening in this space. And of course the organizers of this conference, who I know have put a lot of work into making it as smooth and easy as possible for you all to attend. So thank you. First I want to ask a question, actually. How many of you in the audience here are students? Is it safe to make the assumption most people here are students? Okay. Of the students, or actually, it doesn't even matter if you're not a student, how many of you aspire to be an entrepreneur sometime in your career? Okay, so yeah, a little bit more than half. And of those of you that put your hands up saying you want to be an entrepreneur, are you thinking very much about what the social impact and the environmental impact is going to be on the business model you're creating? The easier way to phrase that question is, do you aspire to be a social entrepreneur? Yeah, so most hands are going up. All right. I am curious about what the people who didn't put their hands up are interested in, but I know there's lots of different things that you can do to get involved in this space outside of entrepreneurship, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that by describing a little bit about what we do at Volans. To start off with, Marcus provided a little bit of background on my background, but maybe I'd like to just add a little bit more of a human context to why I'm in this space. As Marcus said, started off in art. Worked in the insurance industry, of all places, for about 4 years. And while I was there, it was a really interesting job, but I found that I was really enjoying what I was doing after work more, which was doing some volunteer work in the community, getting involved in some economic development projects that really had social issues to their core. And I sort of had this epiphany moment where I was like, well, if I'm enjoying what I'm doing outside of my work, then I need to do something about that. So that was actually the impetus for me to do my MBA. While I was there, I did sort of have a specialization in social enterprise and innovation. But what's a little bit different, I think, to when I did my MBA to the people that are here in school right now is that when I did it, there was a real feeling that this was something you could do classes in, but there really wasn't any application for it. You could learn about social enterprise, you could learn about value creation in business, but when it came to it, you were going to take a job, and it was probably going to be in management consulting or investment banking or something, and it became sort of a nice to have rather than the core thing that you do. And I felt trapped to that, despite being sort of a social enterprise person, having gone into the MBA thinking I want to do more in social sector, and I was unable to resist the siren song of management consulting. So I ended up at Boston Consulting Group, great firm. I should be, I put it out there, it's a really great company, but it didn't allow me to do that social stuff that I was really eager to do from the very beginning. So that's why I left and I joined Volans, and I will tell you a little bit more about what we do at the end of the presentation. But I guess the other human context I want to sort of layer on at the outset before going into the content is that, I've been at Volans for 3 years since it started. And when I started it, was new to London. The space was still growing. I was really fired up and really enjoying, the consulting work that I was doing. But things changed really, really significantly for me, actually 10 months ago, almost to the day. And that was when I had my first son, my only son. But it meant that all of this thinking around, what's going on in this world from a social and environmental perspective became a lot less about me and what I wanted to do. And this might sound a little bit funny because obviously working in the social sector just generally is about a bigger thing and working to improve the quality of the world for others. But I found that once I had my son, it brought a whole different level of urgency to this. And so I want to thank all of you guys who are in this room because you're signaling that you're interested in this and you're signaling that you're committed to doing something to help the world. And that's not just for those of us that are in this room. It's for the people that are living around the world, and it's for the next generations that are coming, including my son. So if any of you have kids, or when you do have kids, just be ready for the impactfulness of what we do in this space to hit a whole different level. So with that human context sort of aside, let me get into the PowerPoint component. Social innovation generation, helping the future take flight. That's the strapline that we use at Volans. We've gone through, I was saying to some people at lunch, we've gone through a couple of different models of trying to describe what we are and what we do and how we do it. And we've decided to really focus on this future piece because we need to be living and supporting innovations and entrepreneurs and ideas, and those can be coming from social entrepreneurs or within companies or within governments that are really helping to try and ensure this future. So that's what our logo is. I'm going to start with this slide. I kind of used to use this in presentations with companies who had never heard of social entrepreneurship before. And it was really just to show that this is a movement. Social entrepreneurs have been around for a very long time. People often say, oh, this is a new term that's just people are starting to talk about now. But in fact, we have social entrepreneurs that have been working 1800s, 1900s. A few of them here that are sort of well known in Europe. We've got Florence Nightingale, who was a social entrepreneur in healthcare. We've got Mary Montessori, a social entrepreneur doing things in education. We've Rob Owen, who was doing cooperative factories in the UK in the 1800s. So this is not something that's new. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. It's just becoming more popular these days, and we'll talk a little bit about why. First time officially the term social entrepreneur was coined was actually in a book. I think it was about either Mary Montessori or Florence Nightingale, but that term was used, bringing two words together, social and entrepreneur. And from there, the godfather, one of the godfathers of this industry, Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, picked it up and made it for the focus of what Ashoka did. Subsequent to that, we have other institutions that have started coming into the market focusing on social entrepreneurship. The Schwab Foundation, does anyone know the Schwab Foundation? No? A couple of people. Schwab Foundation is, I'll take a second to talk about that because one of our co-founders was the founding director of this institution. It's essentially connected to the World Economic Forum, which every year does the conference in Davos. So leading thinkers, business leaders, governments, they all sort of flock to this one area to have really high-level conversations. So the fact that this organization decided to create their foundation and focus on social entrepreneurship is a signal that this was the beginning of things really getting implanted into those high-level conversations. We've got the Skoll Foundation. Jeff Skoll, founder of eBay, could have spent his bajillions on a lot of different philanthropic endeavors, and instead of supporting a particular thematic area, what he decided to do was support social entrepreneurs, so those entrepreneurs that had really innovative ways to think about tackling problems. 2000, we have Unlimited, which is an organization in the UK that was set up that was meant to support social entrepreneurs at the very, very early stages. So again, providing seed capital for people that have ideas. This isn't venture capital. You don't have to have a 2-year business plan or a proof of concept. This is just to get people thinking about ideas that they can use to solve social problems. I think a really catalytic moment in this movement was when Mohammed Yunus received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work setting up Grameen Microfinance. Lots of literature started to emerge. The Power of Unreasonable People, as Marcus knows, is a book that it actually is one of the things that really made me come into the space. It just tells a lot of stories about social entrepreneurs that are finding ways to really transform the markets that they're operating in. And I've put Obama here on the bottom, not because it really directly connects to social entrepreneurship, but some of the policies that Obama has been talking about within his leadership in the U.S. have included social enterprise, and he even set up a global office of social innovation about 2 years ago. So it's starting to make its way into sort of more mainstream behavior. You'll notice one thing I haven't done is define social entrepreneurship in talking about this, because this is sort of one of the things I think that's held this movement back quite a bit, which is people are so worried, what is a social entrepreneur and what isn't? My stance on this is we just need to skip over that and just talk about the people that have really interesting ideas that are changing the world. I've put on the end here this little sort of starry thing, and that's to reflect that there's something that's happening now that's a little bit different. There's the next step in this movement that's begun, and I want to draw the connection to that with this slide, which is what we use with a lot of our clients when we start talking to them about the evolution that's been happening in this space, not from an entrepreneurial perspective, but from a business strategy perspective. Back in the 60s, the role of business, or the role of business in thinking about their responsibility to social issues, started off with denial. And the people within the company that were really sort of leading the charge with that were people in the legal department. Through the 70s and 80s, we started to see a bit of a transformation where people were starting to say, actually, government's going to be pushing some really strict regulations down on us. So it's not about denying that there's a rule. The government's telling us there's a rule for us to be playing. So how do we figure out how we comply to what the government's saying? In addition to the legal group, you start seeing the marketing people that are getting involved with it at this point, because they're saying, well, if we're complying, then we need to be finding a way to communicating our compliance. You'll then see the evolution. It keeps on moving down through the 80s and 90s, and that's where we see the evolution and the introduction of CSR being one of those critical things. And companies started developing departments for social responsibility, and we had sort of a conversation about at lunch where I have to be a bit more careful about this now. But I think the term CSR has had its heyday. I mean, I think we need to now move on to the next phase, which is social innovation. And what differentiates social innovation from the denial, the compliance, and the CSR phase is that it's involving many, many more people within the company. It's about embedding this social responsibility, the CR part of it, or the SR part of it, into the actual core business model of what the business does. And that's where you start seeing the C-suite get involved. Does people know the C-suite as a term? That's the chief level people within big companies. So chief executive officer, chief financial officer, chief operating officer, the sort of decision makers within the company. Now, I think we're also going through a bit of a transition on the other end of this, because I think the social innovation movement sort of started in the 2000s and is going to keep on going. But I think there's something else that's going to be happening when we start seeing both these two slides paired together. So the movement of social entrepreneurship colliding with the movement of the role of business in thinking about their social responsibility. What is social innovation? I don't like defining social entrepreneurship, but I do find there is value in talking a little bit about social innovation. And usually when I define it, I do start by defining what is innovation to start with. And innovation is generally accepted to being the commercialization of ideas. There's two important words in there, commercialization and ideas. So it has to be something that it's not just a concept, it has to be actualized, so it has to be commercialized in a way that actually creates value. And it also has to be an idea. It has to be something new, something different than what's been done before. Now, social innovation takes a lot of what we know about in the innovation definition, but it adds this really important precondition, which is that the impacts of these innovations, these new ideas, need to be having social and environmental value. And it's really important to remember that social innovation, even though that's generally the language that's used, is social innovation, actually has to account for environmental innovation. And the example we've used with one of our big clients recently that has adopted social innovation as their new strategy, evolving from a philanthropy and CSR model, is they said, well, this is about making the world a better place, but it's about giving people access to things they didn't otherwise have. So, and they used the example, so what about people in developing countries? We want to give them access to the same things that people in the West have. And we have to sort of pause there because, you know, if everyone in India had access to a car, yeah, that would be social good. But the environmental repercussions of that are pretty significant too. So when we talk about this kind of innovation, it is important that we think about the environment and the social side of it together. It makes it a lot more complicated, and this is definitely not a way of making it easy for companies to think about how they do it. But I think it's more important to be upfront about what this definition actually means and what, if you're signing up to us, you're making a commitment to. Why the C-suite is interested in social innovation is a question that we get quite a bit, and we've sort of decided to break it down into sort of 4 key competitive advantages. The first is that if you're a CEO or a senior level in a senior position within a company, you're going to be looking to the future and you're going to be thinking about what are the new products and services that we can include in our portfolio or be developing. And quite a few of those will have elements of social innovation in them. Like it will be playing into the social innovation landscape we've outlined before. So for example, GE Eco-Imagination. Do you guys know of GE Eco-Imagination? Have people heard of that? This is the department within GE that is focused on green technologies, and they have a series of criteria. So these are all environmentally friendly technologies that are out there. What's really remarkable, and the reason why we use it as an example, is because of the amount of investment Jeff Immelt, the CEO of GE, is making in this space. I think they put $10 billion, like billion with a B, dollars of R&D in this, and they've committed to that until 2015. And I think last year, actually it's not last year, at 2009, so a year and a bit ago, they had reported a 6% increase in their earnings, in their revenues in this particular area of their business. And that revenue top line was $18 billion. And that's for all of these technologies that are in this sort of green eco-imagination space. Now, GE gets a lot of criticism for greenwashing, which is sort of saying, you know, oh, well, they're just sort of saying they're doing a lot of green stuff, and you know, are they really doing it? Those numbers to me signal that they are. So I like to go on the defensive and say I think GE is an example of a company that is taking a real leadership role, and they are developing products and services for the future that have this environmental sustainability woven into their very, very core. The second one is new markets. I wish I had a better case study to use for this. So if anyone in the audience can come up with one, maybe a Spanish one, I'd be really interested in it. But this is about finding new markets. Danone and Grameen, have people heard of this partnership before? I see a few heads nodding. Yeah, there's quite a few case studies that are being written on it. I don't think it's necessarily been proven to be like a blockbuster success, but there's some interesting ingredients. If this is, we're going to talk about a recipe for future business models and how you can gain competitive advantage, then there's something to look at in Grameen Danone. This is essentially a partnership between Mohammed Yunus's microfinance expertise in Bangladesh and Danone, which is a large, a dairy company in France that manufactures yogurt. And what they did was they created a partnership such that the microfinance women that work with the Grameen Bank were involved with being trained in figuring out how to distribute yogurt, micronutrient yogurt, so a yogurt that had special nutrients that were missing in those communities, to those areas in the developing area of Bangladesh. And so it's interesting because it's 2 different companies that are coming together to solve a social issue in collaboration. And I think Diego, I'm not sure if he's here, but Diego, who's doing his presentation this morning on the collaborative consumption model and the car sharing, I mean, he talked a lot about the importance of collaboration and partnership, and that's something that I would really underscore as being important. The third competitive advantage that I think CEOs and senior people within businesses are paying a lot more attention to is their employee engagement. So how do you attract the best talent, and how do you retain it, and how do you train it? So how do you keep the people within companies really, really connected to what's happening within the business, but also what's happening in the broader world? Allianz is a really interesting company. A full disclosure, they're one of our clients, and we're really excited to be working with them because they found a way to develop a leadership training course where they partner with social entrepreneurs. So they bring their top people. Allianz is a financial services company based in Germany. So they're really, really finance-focused people, and they're finding new ways to educate them on what the future of that business industry is going to look like by partnering with social entrepreneurs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that model. But to me, that's partly that is a key piece of social innovation, because it is thinking through what that business is going to look like in the future and making sure your employees are connected in with that. The last one is a differentiation strategy, which is what social innovation can do. And it's very purposely last, because I think this is partly what CSR is focused a little too much on, which was how do you promote what you do. But Pepsi 2 years ago with the Super Bowl developed and said instead of developing a really slick advertising campaign, they were going to instead use that money to set up a social innovation seed fund. And so that's really cool in itself, but the reason why it's a competitive advantage is because Nielsen, which in the US is the big organization that tracks media hits, found that 21% of the exposure to advertisement or to media and marketing during the Super Bowl actually went to this campaign. And it was because it was something different. It was not people spending $20 million on a 30-second spot with Britney Spears in it. It was something really different. So it was having an impact by engaging with people on finding out ideas and investing in them, social ideas and investing in them, but it also was actually helping Pepsi really defend its brand and differentiate itself from some of the other big beverage companies that do send their money in a different way. So how can companies start thinking about becoming socially innovative? And again, this is sort of what we do at Volans quite a bit. I think there's two things you need to be considering. One is, you need to be thinking about how you drive culture change within your organization. And I've been talking for the most part about the C-suite level and down. So you go from the chief executive saying, here's what you do, and guiding the principals. But there's also very much a bottom-up level, and that requires a level of culture change within the organization. The other one I'll talk about is developing partnerships, which again is something Diego talked quite a bit about too. This was a framework we put together for a recent McKinsey quarterly. McKinsey is a big management consulting company that's starting to look a little bit more in this space because they're recognizing their big clients are interested in issues of social innovation and how they can get people to think more about this internally. The way this framework works, and I'm going to just really briefly talk about it, it's actually meant to be just sort of a linear way of thinking about it. If you want people to change, if you want to change the culture of an organization, of a system, you first need to catch into people's mindsets. You need to make people understand that there is something that they can do that's different, and recognize that differentiation is possible. The second step is to get them to adapt their behaviors. So to not just think about it, but then to behave differently because of that insight they have. And once you have people behaving differently, that's how you change culture. Because once I behave differently, I impact you, you impact that person, and that person impacts that one, and all of a sudden we've got something that has adapted a culture. And so again, this can be operated within a framework of a city, a town, a region, or it can be within a company. So if a company wants to really move into a place where they are more socially innovative, they need to get everyone bought in. And it's just recognizing that there are some linear steps you can follow and interventions at each of those steps to perpetuate it. The second piece is developing partnerships. I'm not sure if I'm really allowed to put this up, so I'm going to ask that people not quote it, but I think it's a really interesting signal from our sister company, Sustainability and GlobeScan, which is a research company. They did a survey of sustainability experts, and they found that, really interestingly, NGO leaders used to be thought as being the people that influenced companies, as well as sort of leaders in the scientific community, corporate leaders, other corporate leaders. But what's happened in the last little while is that social entrepreneurs have become a much greater influencer on these agendas. I want to really flag that, because to me this slide brings together the first two pieces, which is, again, the evolution of social entrepreneurship that's now coming together with the evolution of the sort of role of business and social innovation. And that number actually is what screams that to me. In developing partnerships, though, with social entrepreneurs, it is difficult because if anyone here has been an entrepreneur or knows entrepreneurs, it's a very different mindset than working within a company. You like to do things fast, you like to work on things with low resources, you just get things done, there's no bureaucracy, you just make things happen. Whereas with big companies, that's not necessarily always the way. So we found this little acronym when we're working with trying to build partnerships between companies and entrepreneurs is really helpful, and it's ECRC. So the first and really most important step is to set expectations up front. So if you're creating a partnership with a social entrepreneur as a business in order to further your social innovation agenda, you really need to be upfront, both sides, around what you're expecting to get out of that partnership. And it's really, really important to do that before you sign any documents, before you make any commitments. Because if expectations are totally different, then you're destined to fail in that partnership. So really important first step. The second one is to make sure that there's really good chemistry between the people that will be leading that partnership. And this comes back to, again, I'm really big on the human element. It's kind of my soapbox that I like to stand on. I feel like people too often think of business as business, governments as government, consumers as consumers, but in fact what we all are people. So a social entrepreneur is a person, as is someone within a company. And if those two people don't have trust, don't respect one another, don't get along, and sometimes chemistry, people don't get along, and that's okay, but we need to actually check that, because again, if you don't have that chemistry up front, the partnership is doomed to fail. It kind of goes hand in hand with expectation, but the R is for risk tolerance. Again, as I said, entrepreneurs have a sort of much greater can-do attitude. They want to get things done, and they kind of don't really care what they need to do in order to do that, which means that there's a higher level of risk that they're willing to take, oftentimes, versus businesses, which, mostly because of that infrastructure that is in place, they do have a risk tolerance that's somewhat different. There's usually less of an appetite for risk. I'm making really, really broad sweeping generalizations as well. I mean, there's obviously exceptions to all the rules that I'm talking about, but this is something that we really want to make sure is checked, that the risk tolerance, that there is some alignment to it. And then finally, it's candid feedback. The only way that you really grow and learn about how partnerships can work well between social entrepreneurs and businesses is by making sure there's regular and often and very, very candid conversations happening about how things are working. Are they working? Are they not? How can we fix it? Here's a quick little case study, and it's, again, one of our clients, Allianz, where, as I said, what we do is we pair these really sort of sophisticated black belt process experts from Allianz with social entrepreneurs that have a particular challenge. And this becomes about reciprocity, which is a really important word when you talk about partnerships, and I feel like sometimes gets lost when you're looking at how to get corporations to work with people in the social innovation or social entrepreneurship community. And the core tenet of reciprocity is equality. So it's not about some slick guy in a suit or a girl in a suit coming in from their, desk in the corner office of, a big tower in the middle of Munich to some sort of tiny little office that a social enterprise or a social entrepreneur is running. That power dynamic actually is what we are desperately trying to mitigate and destroy, because actually what we found in our experience is that it's the people that work in the professional, in the mainstream businesses that get much more out of this partnership than the social entrepreneurs. So again, there's a skills match that happens where, again, these process experts go and work with these social entrepreneurs on a particular challenge that they have in order to scale. But what, again, we find is that those social entrepreneurs are actually ending up being the teacher more, and that those people are going back into their companies with a very different way of thinking about how they work and what they can do differently within the businesses. So it's just an example of how a partnership can work if you take into account those four qualities of setting expectations, making sure there's chemistry, acknowledging a risk tolerance, and then having a candid feedback loop. I want to put this up here because this is a little bit about the social innovation thought leadership that we're involved with, and we're by no means the experts in this space. There are quite a few other people working, but what I can talk to is the first report that was done in a series with support from the School Foundation, and this was actually I can really compliment this one because it was before my time, so I wasn't involved with it at all. But the social entrepreneur was a piece that was done to really look at what's happening within companies. How do some of these things get going within companies? And oftentimes there's an individual within a company that spearheads it, that gets the ball rolling, that's willing to take risk, that figures out what the right partnerships are, finds the chemistry, ensures the candid feedback is happening. So this first report was around social innovation from a company's perspective. So who are the individuals, what are the personality traits? And it's sort of a field guide, so that if any of you are not planning to be social entrepreneurs and perhaps intrigued by a career as a social entrepreneur working within a company, this might be an interesting document for you to read. The second one there was the first report we put out at Volans, and it's called The Phoenix Economy. And what it does is track what the social innovations are that we've seen, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector, by governments and by social entrepreneurs. So it has a whole range of different ideas, different organizations, different initiatives that meets the sort of definition. And we created it so that there was actually a baseline out there that people understood through example what some other companies or similar peers to their industries were actually activating in the social innovation space. What's interesting about it was we wrote it right at the time of the credit crunch, so in 2008, when the market was just falling completely apart. So the overall narrative that we decided to use in positioning the social innovation movement was that in times of crisis, in times when the market is turning into ash, which it was in London, I know it was around the world, instead of rebuilding with the same qualities that led to that crash in the first place, how can you promote a phoenix-like economy, a phoenix-like thinking, which is a way of rising from the ashes, bigger, stronger, and different. And that's what, for the last 3 years, we have been really trying to push, which is, as the market begins to recover, and is now recovering, how can we, wherever possible, insert this thinking of, let's not just build it the same way it was before, the same institutions, the infrastructures, the mindsets, the behaviors. How can we get this culture change to happen so that when we rebuild it, it is much more focused on social innovation? And to be honest, that's what's going to create a lot of opportunity for all of us that are interested in working in this space. The last piece here, which is this, it's not really a report, but it's the report that we're working on right now. It's the one that we're going to hopefully launch. No, actually, we will launch in September, and it's called The Intergenerationals, and it's trying to take on a new way of thinking about social innovation, which we think is important to bring this thinking forward. And that is, we need to be thinking on much longer timescales than we currently are. If we're going to assume that my son, our collective children, are going to have an economy, or they're going to have a market, they're going to have a safe place to live, then we need to be thinking on much longer time horizons than most companies, and I'd even hazard most entrepreneurs think on. So instead of thinking about, am I going to be around in 5 years and what am I going to be doing, in this report we're trying to get at, what are your grandchildren going to be doing in 100 years from now if they're working at your company, or if they're living in your country, or if they're being an entrepreneur? What are the qualities or the conditions that they're going to be living in? So we're following a similar formula, actually, to the Phoenix economy, which is we were going out there right now really desperately trying to find examples of companies, of entrepreneurs that have begun to think about those much longer term horizons, or intergenerational time horizons. Dow Chemicals is one of them. They're starting to think about what is their 100-year plan as a company. Shell Foundation is actually one of our supporters on this report, very much thinking about scenario planning. So what are the scenarios look like for organizations working in particular industries? So there's a lot of interesting work that we're collecting right now, and I'd sort of almost end in this is an invitation to all of you. This is a project we're running right now, and if anyone is interested in getting involved and helping us with it, I'd love to share more information with you. I'm going to just leave it on this slide, though. This was a top 10 list that I was asked to do at the Emerge Social Entrepreneurship Conference at Oxford last winter. And I sort of did it really fast on sort of the train right up when I shouldn't say that out loud, but when I was going up to that conference, I thought I just need to have, what are the 10 things that I've sort of learned over the last couple of years that I would sort of communicate through. But I actually printed it out, and I actually have it on my desk, because it's things that I really try to remember every day that I'm working, about what are the things that should be guiding my career and guiding the way I'm thinking about this space. And I'll just run through them. I think they're probably pretty self-evident, but I mean, the first is never to say no. This is a space that is full of opportunity, and there's lots and lots of things going on. If you say no to something, you don't know what door you're closing. So, you know, wherever possible, say yes and pursue things because you never know where it could lead you. That is somewhat in conflict to the second point, which is protect your work-life balance. And I realize that's a paradox, but these two pieces are something that really need to be considered together, which is don't say no, but also really find the ways to make sure that you've got your own personal time to reflect on the things that you're learning in the business side or what you're doing on a career side. I haven't cracked this at all, so if anyone does figure out how to do it, please send me an email because I'm desperate to know. I'll tell you, the one thing that I'm most worried about with my business, with Volans, is the staff burnout. We've got people that are working well into the night and starting again early in the morning, and it's genuinely because they love and they are so committed to what we're doing. So I'll just leave those 2 points as things to consider, and hopefully you can figure out what your balance is between those two. The third is wear shoes, not sandals. That might not be as relevant here in Spain, but there is this sort of notion that, you know, when you go and work in the social enterprise or social entrepreneurship, or even a social entrepreneurial role, you're sort of, you know, the expression in the US and in Canada and to some extent in the UK is, you know, you go to work wearing sandals and you're sort of a tree hugger and you eat granola. And what I'd like to just make sure is we're dispelling that as a myth. People who are operating within these organizations are really highly professional. You know, it's not about this being a peripheral industry. This is about how do we make it mainstream. And by being mainstream, it means, you know, acting in the mainstream nature. So, you know, treat yourself professionally if you're operating in this space, because that will make people think higher of you professionally as well. Surround yourself with smart people. It's a decision that I made very early on in my career when I left BCG, when I was trying to figure out what my next move was going to be. It was I went to go to find who were the people that I thought were really leading in this space. John Elkington and Pamela Hartigan, who are our two co-founders, and I've never looked back on that decision. Being around the people, smart people that you can learn from all the time is a priceless asset to have in your career. Elbows down, that refers to the fact that a lot of people in the private sector still think a lot about competitiveness and how can you sort of carve your own areas by eroding value for the whole. And I think that, you know, if you can keep your elbows down and look for ways to collaborate with partners, both social entrepreneurs, but even if you end up working in business with other businesses, that creates more value and more good as a whole. Avoid analysis paralysis. This sort of refers to, if anyone's been in the consulting industry before, there is a tendency to spend a lot of time analyzing data, analyzing it before you get yourself to a place where you make a decision. My sense is that personally can cause a lot of inactivity. You spend so much time analyzing that you don't actually end up doing anything, or you analyze things so much that there's definitely not going to be a go option that's part of it because there's just too many factors. So be aware of that. You know, obviously do some analysis, but not so much that you decide not to do something, and because you've tried to take on board too many other people's points of view. Empathy, again, hopefully a thread that's been through this talk is that I really do feel that it's important to have that human connection and consider that human context. And a lot of that has to do with just remembering the people that are around you are people, and trying to build empathy with them is actually a great way to build partnerships and to get things done. Stay positive. There's a lot of really crappy things out there in this world that can get you down if you really think about them. But what I find really uplifting about this space is working with the entrepreneurs and the innovators that, despite the challenges that they're facing, keep on driving forward and looking for those opportunities. And that mindset actually can be the best kind of fuel that you need to get you through sort of some of the tough times. Leave a legacy. This kind of is to the point about, you know, my kid, your kids that you're going to have. You know, doing something that really is making the world a good and better place for them to live in is actually, in my opinion, one of the highest callings. So just remember that on those days where you're working really hard and not sure what you're doing, but that there is a legacy piece that you're leaving behind. And finally, this sort of connects with the analysis paralysis. ready, fire, aim. And I just love that saying, because I think that's what entrepreneurs do a lot of the time. You know, they get themselves ready to do it. They don't really spend a whole lot of time sort of narrowing their focus. They just go out there and start doing it. It's definitely what we did at Volans, not that we're by any stretch a success story. We've had our times of turbulence and trouble, but I'm much more confident about our business model because we do rapid iterations. We try things, we put them out there, and then we spend time assessing them. And that model has worked for us, and it works for a lot of the social entrepreneurs that we've worked with. So if that's one of the things that you want to do, just be mindful of that. I think that's it. I'll leave my email is here. For those of you, I'm glad to see there's Twitter feeds everywhere. To be honest, I think Twitter has become one of the most powerful tools in this space. I get most of my information through Twitter. I check it now multiple times a day, much more than I check my email. And so if you're interested in staying connected to what's happening in this space in real time, because it's changing very quickly, I would really encourage you to go on Twitter, find some really good followers, and find some people to follow. I'm happy to share with you some of the people that I really find interesting and I get a lot of my information from. And if anyone is ever in London, or in Singapore for that matter, you know, this is a community, and we're about building community. So please consider our Volan offices a home for you. If you need a place to work, if you need a place to brainstorm, if you need a place just to check your email, we're located in central London. We're finding our office space in Singapore right now, but please keep us in mind, and you have an open reception whenever you come to London. I'm really happy to take any questions that anyone has. I know we've tried to cover a lot, from human element to entrepreneurship to what's happening in business, but I'm really happy to answer any questions either here or afterwards in some of the networking or social sections of the conference. So thank you very much. People want to go outside. I understand.
Wow, for the first thing. Very, very inspiring presentation. For the second, I mean, as I presented you, you work with the private and public sector. For the private sector, it might be more or easier to influence them by showing them and by presenting them some nice benefits that they will obtain by changing a strategy towards a social innovation strategy. But how do you work with the public sector, for example, if you're working with governments? Because I oftentimes think you might have a nice idea, you might have a social innovation strategy, and really be a prospering business, but how do you really change the framework within business is done? Because I think your idea can be as good as it wants, but once the framework is in place, you really can scale social innovations and social businesses. And how do you work with governments in that respect?
That's a really good question, and I didn't really talk very much about our government work in this particular presentation because it would take a really long time to go through it. But I'll try and answer that quickly. To start off with, how we work with governments is generally we work as sort of strategy consultants, and our particular role there is helping them learn what's happened in other countries so that they can develop their own models. There's a lot of countries that are experimenting with how they can support social enterprise and social entrepreneurship, whether it be through creating intermediaries, creating funds. In the UK, we were having a conversation at lunch, there's a whole lot of talk about big society banks, which is being run essentially from a government standpoint. So we work with them to make sure that, so for example, countries like Canada are learning about what's happening in the UK, and that Singapore, which is doing a lot of work in social innovation,